Let me tell you a story about betrayal, about a boy who had everything and then lost it all in a single day. But that's not where this story ends. No. This is a story about dreams, both the kind you see when you sleep and the kind you refuse to let die even when you're chained in darkness. This is the story of Joseph, and I promise you, it's not what you think. See, most people remember the coat, that famous coat of many colors. They remember the dreamer. But they forget the pit, they forget the chains, they forget the years of injustice, the false accusations, the forgotten promises. They forget that before Joseph wore a crown, he wore the scars of a slave. Let me take you back. Back to a time when family could be your greatest enemy, and when the path to your destiny leads straight through hell. But picture this. The ancient land of Canaan, somewhere around 1800 BC, a family of shepherds living in tents, tending flocks under an endless sky. There's a father named Jacob, a man with 12 sons. But among all those boys, there was one he loved more than the rest: Joseph. Now, I want you to understand something. Joseph wasn't the oldest, he wasn't the strongest. He was actually the second youngest, just 17 years old. But he was different. There was something about him, a brightness, an integrity. He was his father's favorite, and Jacob, he didn't hide it. He gave Joseph a gift, a coat. But this wasn't just any coat, friend. This was a long robe with sleeves, the kind that royalty wore, the kind that said, "You don't work in the fields. You're not like your brothers. You're special." Can you imagine how that looked? And 10 older brothers out there every day, covered in dust and sheep dung, breaking their backs under the scorching sun. And here comes Joseph, strolling around in a robe that screams, "I'm Dad's favorite." The brothers? They hated him for it. The Bible doesn't sugarcoat it. It says they couldn't even speak a kind word to him. That's how deep the resentment ran. Every time they saw that coat, it was like a knife twisting in their gut. But Joseph, he made it worse. See, Joseph was a dreamer, and not in the poetic head-in-the-clouds way. He had actual dreams, vivid prophetic visions that came to him in the night, and in these dreams, he saw things, future things, impossible things. One morning, he gathered his brothers and told them about a dream he had had. In the dream, they were all out in the field, binding sheaves of grain. Base in Joseph's sheaf, it stood up straight, and all his brothers' sheaves, they bowed down to his. You can imagine how well that went over. "What?" they snarled. "You think you're going to rule over us? You think we're going to bow down to you?" But Joseph wasn't done. He had another dream. This time, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were all bowing down to him. When he told his father this one, even Jacob was taken aback. "What kind of dream is this?" he asked. "Do you really think your mother and I and your brothers will bow down to you?" Now, here's the thing. Joseph wasn't trying to be arrogant. He was just honest. He saw something, and he shared it. But to his brothers, this was the last straw. The favorite son with the fancy coat now thinks he's going to be their master. The hatred turned to something darker, something dangerous. They began to plot. One day, Jacob sent Joseph out to check on his brothers. They were tending the flocks far from home in a place called Dothan. Joseph put on his special coat, that beautiful, hated coat, and set off alone across the wilderness to find them. The brothers saw him coming from a distance. That colorful coat was visible for miles. "Here comes the dreamer," one of them muttered. And right then and there, in that moment, they made a decision. A terrible, irreversible decision. "Let's kill him," they said. "We'll throw him into one of these pits and say a wild animal devoured him. Then we'll see what becomes of his dreams." Let that sink in, friend. These weren't strangers. These weren't enemies on a battlefield. These were his brothers, the people who grew up with him, who shared meals with him, who knew his laugh, his voice, his heart, and they wanted him dead. One brother, Reuben, tried to save him. "Let's not kill him," he said. "Just throw him in this pit." His plan was to come back later and rescue Joseph, but he underestimated how far hatred can go. When Joseph arrived, excited to see his brothers, they grabbed him. They stripped off that coat, the symbol of everything they resented, and they threw him into an empty cistern, a deep, dark pit in the middle of nowhere. Joseph was down there, bruised, confused, terrified, crying out for help. And his brothers? They sat down to eat lunch. Can you imagine that? The sound of their brothers screaming for mercy while they casually passed around bread and wine? Then something happened. A caravan of traders appeared on the horizon, heading down to Egypt. And one of the brothers, Judah, had an idea. "Why kill him?" Judah said. "Let's sell him instead. He's our brother after all, our own flesh and blood." How generous! They pulled Joseph out of the pit. For a brief moment, he must have thought he was saved. But then he saw the traders, the ropes, the chains, and he understood. They sold him, their own brother. For 20 pieces of silver, Joseph was dragged away, screaming, begging, pleading for them to stop, and his brothers just watched him disappear over the horizon. Then they took that beautiful coat, killed a goat, and dipped the coat in blood. They brought it back to their father. "We found this," they said. "Is this Joseph's coat?" Jacob recognized it instantly. His face went white, his legs gave out. He tore his clothes and wept uncontrollably. "My son is dead," he cried. A wild animal has devoured him. Joseph is no more." And the brothers? They stood there and let their father believe the lie. For years, they watched him grieve day after day and said nothing. But Joseph wasn't dead. He was in chains on his way to a foreign land with no idea if he'd ever see home again. Egypt, the land of pyramids and pharaohs, the most powerful civilization on earth. And Joseph arrived there as property. He was sold to a man named Potiphar, the captain of Pharaoh's guard, a high-ranking official with a big house and many servants. And Joseph? He was now a slave in that house. But here's the thing about Joseph. Even at rock bottom, even in chains, even in a foreign land where he didn't speak the language, there was something about him. An integrity, a work ethic, a presence. The Bible says that God was with Joseph, and whatever Joseph did, it prospered. Potiphar noticed. This young Hebrew slave wasn't like the others. He was trustworthy, capable, wise beyond his years. So Potiphar promoted him, put him in charge of the entire household. Everything Potiphar owned was under Joseph's care, and Potiphar didn't worry about a thing. He just trusted Joseph completely. For a brief moment, it seemed like maybe, just maybe, Joseph's life was turning around. He'd gone from pit to slavery to, well, still slavery, but at least he was respected. At least he had some dignity. But that's when things got worse. Potiphar's wife noticed Joseph too. The Bible says Joseph was well-built and handsome, and she wanted him. Day after day, she tried to seduce him. "Come to bed with me," she'd whisper when no one else was around. But Joseph refused, every single time. "How could I do such a wicked thing?" he said. "How could I sin against God and betray my master who trusts me?" One day, when no one else was in the house, she grabbed his cloak and pulled him toward her. "Come to bed with me," she demanded. Joseph ran. He literally left his cloak in her hands and fled the house. And that's when her desire turned to rage. She screamed. When the other servants came running, she held up Joseph's cloak and lied through her teeth. "That Hebrew slave tried to assault me," she cried. "He came in here to take advantage of me, and when I screamed, he ran and left his cloak." When Potiphar came home and heard her story, he was furious. He didn't ask questions, didn't investigate. He just had Joseph arrested and thrown into prison, the royal prison. So the place where Pharaoh's prisoners were kept. Joseph, who had done everything right, was now sitting in a dungeon, innocent, forgotten, betrayed yet again. Have you ever felt like that, friend? Like you did everything right and life just kept punishing you anyway? Years passed in that prison. Not days, not months. Years. The Bible doesn't tell us much about those years, but I want you to think about what that must have been like. Joseph was probably in his early 20s by now. The best years of his life. Wasting away in darkness. No trial, no release date, no hope of freedom. He could have become bitter, angry, hardened. But he didn't. Even in prison, that same quality emerged. The warden noticed something different about Joseph. He put him in charge of the other prisoners. Once again, Joseph was faithful with what little he had. And then one day, 2 new prisoners arrived, Pharaoh's cupbearer and his baker. They'd somehow offended the king and been thrown in jail. And one night, both of them had strange dreams that troubled them deeply. Joseph noticed their distress. "Why do you look so sad today?" he asked. "We both had dreams," they said, "but there's no one to interpret them." Joseph smiled. "Don't interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams." The cupbearer went first. He dreamed of a vine with 3 branches that budded, blossomed, and produced grapes. He squeezed the grapes into Pharaoh's cup and placed it in Pharaoh's hand. Joseph listened carefully, then spoke. "Here's what it means. In 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your position. You'll be his cupbearer again." Just like before." Then Joseph said something vulnerable, something desperate. "But when it goes well with you, remember me. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison. I was kidnapped from my homeland, and here in Egypt I've done nothing to deserve being in this dungeon." The cupbearer nodded eagerly. "I'll remember you, I promise." The baker, encouraged by the positive interpretation, shared his dream next. He had seen 3 baskets of bread on his head, and birds were eating from the top basket. Joseph's face grew somber. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "In 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head and impale your body on a pole, and the birds will eat your flesh." 3 days later, it was Pharaoh's birthday. He threw a feast and brought out the 2 prisoners. Just as Joseph had said, the cupbearer was restored to his position. And the baker? He was executed, exactly as Joseph had predicted. The cupbearer went back to his comfortable life in the palace, back to pouring wine for the most powerful man in the world. And Joseph, he waited. Day after day, he waited for the cupbearer to remember him, to mention his name, to set him free. But the cupbearer forgot. The Bible puts it plainly. The chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. 2 more years passed, 2 more years in that prison, hoping every day that someone would remember, that someone would care. Have you ever been forgotten, friend? Ever felt invisible, like your suffering didn't matter to anyone? Joseph knew that feeling well. Then one night, everything changed. Pharaoh had a dream. No, 2 dreams. And they shook him to his core. In the first dream, he was standing by the Nile River when 7 fat, healthy cows came up out of the water and began grazing. Then 7 other cows came up, thin, sickly, ugly cows, and they ate the 7 fat cows. But even after eating them, the thin cows looked just as ugly as before. Pharaoh woke up disturbed, but he fell asleep again and had a second dream. This time, he saw 7 heads of grain, healthy and full, growing on a single stalk. Then 7 other heads sprouted, thin and scorched by the desert wind, and the thin heads swallowed up the 7 healthy heads. Pharaoh woke up in the morning deeply troubled. He called for all the magicians and wise men of Egypt. He told them his dreams and demanded an interpretation, but none of them could tell him what it meant, not one. That's when the cupbearer finally remembered. "Oh," he gasped, "I just remembered something. 2 years ago when I was in prison, there was this young Hebrew slave. He interpreted dreams for me and the baker, and everything he said came true exactly as he predicted." Pharaoh didn't hesitate. "Bring him to me, now." Messengers ran to the prison. They found Joseph in his cell, dirty, bearded, still wearing prison clothes after all these years. "Get up," they shouted. "Pharaoh wants to see you." Joseph quickly shaved and changed his clothes. Can you imagine what was going through his mind? After all these years of waiting, suffering, being forgotten, suddenly he's being summoned to stand before the most powerful man in the world. He was brought into Pharaoh's throne room. The opulence must have been overwhelming, gold everywhere. On pillars reaching toward the sky, guards lining the walls. And there, on his throne, sat Pharaoh himself. "I had a dream," Pharaoh said, "and no one can interpret it. But I've heard that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it." Joseph's response was immediate and humble. "I cannot do it," he said, "but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires." Pharaoh told him the dreams, the cows, the grain, all of it. And Joseph listened. Then he spoke. Both dreams mean the same thing, Joseph said with confidence. God is showing Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows and the 7 good heads of grain represent 7 years of great abundance throughout Egypt. But the 7 thin cows and the 7 scorched heads of grain represent 7 years of famine that will follow. The throne room went silent. The abundance will be forgotten, Joseph continued, because the famine that follows will be so severe. The reason the dream was given twice is because the matter has been firmly decided by God, and he will do it soon. Then Joseph did something bold. He didn't just interpret the dream, he offered a solution. Let Pharaoh appoint a wise and discerning man to oversee the land of Egypt. Set up overseers to collect 1/5 of the harvest during the 7 good years. Store up the grain in the cities as a reserve for the 7 years of famine. Otherwise, the country will be ruined. Pharaoh looked at his advisors. They looked at each other. Then Pharaoh looked back at Joseph, this 30-year-old Hebrew ex-slave standing before him, and made a decision that would change history. "Can we find anyone like this man?" Pharaoh said. "For he is someone in whom is the Spirit of God." He turned to Joseph. "Since God has made all this known to you, there is no one as wise and discerning as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only I, on my throne, will be greater than you." And just like that, Pharaoh took off his signet ring and put it on Joseph's finger. He dressed him in robes of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. He gave him a chariot to ride in, and people shouted, "Make way!" wherever he went. Joseph went from a prison cell to the second most powerful position in Egypt in a single day. The slave became a prince. The prisoner became a ruler. The forgotten became unforgettable. He was 30 years old. 13 years had passed since his brothers threw him in that pit. Joseph didn't waste time. He traveled throughout Egypt, setting up the system he'd proposed. During the 7 years of abundance, the harvests were so plentiful that he stopped keeping records. There was just too much to count. He stored grain in every city, massive quantities, preparing for the disaster he knew was coming. During this time, Joseph also got married. Pharaoh gave him an Egyptian wife named Asenath, and they had 2 sons. He named the first son Manasseh, which means, "God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household." After everything he'd been through, Joseph was trying to move forward, to leave the pain behind. He named the second son Ephraim, which means, "God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering." Think about that. The land of my suffering. Even in his success, Joseph remembered. But he didn't pretend the past didn't happen. He acknowledged it. But he also saw how God had brought fruit from that suffering. Then, just as Joseph had predicted, the 7 years of abundance came to an end. The famine began. It wasn't just in Egypt. It spread throughout the entire region. Countries all around began to starve. Crops failed, livestock died, people grew desperate. But Egypt had grain, mountains of it, all because one man had listened to God and prepared. When the Egyptians cried out to Pharaoh for food, he told them, "Go to Joseph, do whatever he tells you." Joseph opened the storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptians, and soon people from other countries started coming to Egypt to buy grain as well, including a group of 10 men from Canaan, Joseph's brothers. Back in Canaan, Jacob and his family were starving. The famine had hit them hard, and their supplies were running out. Jacob heard that there was grain in Egypt, so he sent 10 of his sons to buy some. But he kept Benjamin, Joseph's only full brother, his youngest son, at home. After losing Joseph, Jacob couldn't bear the thought of losing Benjamin too. So the 10 brothers made the journey to Egypt. They arrived in the great capital city, probably intimidated by the massive buildings, the foreign language, the Egyptian culture. They made their way to the distribution center where they would need permission to buy grain. And they were brought before the governor of Egypt, the man in charge of all grain distribution. They bowed down before him with their faces to the ground. The governor looked down at them, and he recognized them immediately. It was Joseph. Imagine that moment, friend. 20 years had passed since he'd seen them. He was 17 when they sold him. He was 37 now. He was clean-shaven like an Egyptian, dressed in royal robes, speaking through an interpreter. To them, he was just another Egyptian official. But to Joseph, These were the faces that haunted his dreams, the voices that had ignored his screams, the hands that had thrown him in a pit and sold him into slavery. The Bible says that Joseph remembered his dreams, those dreams from his youth, where his brothers' sheaves had bowed down to his sheaf. And here they were, bowing before him, just as God had shown him all those years ago. But they had no idea who he was. Joseph's heart must have been racing, every emotion flooding back, the betrayal, the pain, the years of suffering. Yet he could have revealed himself right then, could have had them arrested, executed. He had the power to destroy them with a word. But he didn't. Instead, he spoke to them harshly through an interpreter, pretending to be a suspicious Egyptian official. "Where do you come from?" he demanded. "From the land of Canaan," they replied, "to buy food." "No," Joseph accused them, "you're spies. You've come to see where our land is vulnerable." "No, my lord," they protested. "We're honest men, 12 brothers, sons of one man in Canaan. The youngest is with our father, and one is no more." One is no more. That's how they described him, as if he'd simply ceased to exist, not, "We sold him into slavery," just no more. Joseph put them in prison for 3 days, let them feel what he'd felt. Then he brought them out and made them an offer. "I fear God," he said, "so I'll give you a chance to prove you're honest. One of you will stay here in prison. The rest can go back and take grain to your starving families, but you must bring your youngest brother back to me. Then I'll know you're telling the truth." The brothers looked at each other in panic. Then, speaking in Hebrew, not knowing the Egyptian governor could understand every word, they said something that revealed their guilt. "We're being punished for what we did to our brother," one said. "We saw his distress when he pleaded with us, but we wouldn't listen. That's why this distress has come upon us." Reuben, the oldest, spoke up. "Didn't I tell you not to sin against the boy? But you wouldn't listen. Now we must account for his blood." Joseph had to turn away. Tears were streaming down his face, and he didn't want them to see. After all these years, they still remembered. They still carried the guilt. He composed himself, turned back, and chose Simeon to stay behind as a prisoner. Then he ordered his servants to fill the brothers' sacks with grain, and secretly to put each man's silver back in his sack. The brothers left, troubled and confused, heading back to Canaan. When they got home and opened their sacks, they found their money. Terror gripped them. "What is God doing to us?" they asked. They told Jacob everything, how the Egyptian governor had accused them of being spies, how Simeon was imprisoned, how they had to bring Benjamin back to prove they were honest. Jacob's response was immediate and anguished. "You've deprived me of my children. Joseph is no more. Simeon is no more. And now you want to take Benjamin? Everything is against me." But eventually, the grain ran out. They had no choice. Jacob finally, reluctantly, agreed to let Benjamin go. "If I am bereaved," he said in resignation, "I am bereaved." The brothers returned to Egypt, this time with Benjamin. When Joseph saw Benjamin, his only full brother, now grown, his emotions nearly overwhelmed him. He ordered a feast prepared at his house and had all the brothers brought there. The brothers were terrified. Why were they being brought to the governor's house? Was this about the money that was returned in their sacks? Were they going to be arrested? Made slaves? But Joseph received them warmly. He asked about their father. Is he still living? And when he saw Benjamin, he had to quickly leave the room. The Bible says he went into his private room and wept. He washed his face, decomposed himself, and returned. They ate together, and Joseph made sure Benjamin received 5 times as much food as anyone else. The brothers relaxed a little. Maybe this would be okay. But Joseph wasn't done testing them yet. That night he gave orders to his steward. "Fill the men's sacks with as much food as they can carry, and put each man's silver back in his sack. But in the youngest one's sack, put my silver cup, my personal cup." Early the next morning, the brothers left the city, relieved to be heading home. But they hadn't gone far when Joseph's steward chased them down. "Why have you repaid good with evil?" he demanded. "Why did you steal my master's silver cup?" "What?" they protested. "We would never do such a thing. Search us. If you find it with any of us, let that person die, and the rest of us will become your slaves." "Very well," the steward said, "but only the one who has it will become my slave." He searched their sacks, starting with the oldest and working down to the youngest, and in Benjamin's sack he found the cup. The brothers tore their clothes in despair. They loaded their donkeys and returned to the city, devastated. They were brought before Joseph and fell to the ground before him. "What is this you've done?" Joseph said. "Didn't you know a man like me can find things out?" Judah spoke up, his voice breaking. "What can we say, my lord? How can we prove our innocence? God has uncovered our guilt." He wasn't even talking about the cup anymore. He was talking about Joseph, all those years ago. "We are now your slaves, all of us, including the one who had the cup." But Joseph shook his head. Only the man who had the cup will be my slave. The rest of you can go back to your father in peace." And that's when something beautiful happened. Judah stepped forward. This was the same Judah who had suggested selling Joseph all those years ago, the same man who had profited from his brother's suffering. But he was different now. "Please, my lord," Judah said, his voice desperate, "let me speak. Our father is an old man, and Benjamin is the child of his old age. His brother is dead, and he's the only one of his mother's sons left. Our father loves him deeply." He continued, words pouring out. "You told us to bring him here, and we told you our father said, 'If harm comes to Benjamin, you'll bring my gray head down to the grave in sorrow.' I personally guaranteed the boy's safety. I told my father, if I don't bring him back, I shall bear the blame before you all my life." Then Judah said something that must have shattered Joseph's heart into pieces. "Now please, let me stay here as your slave instead of the boy. Let him return with his brothers. How can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? I cannot bear to see the misery that would come upon my father. Do you understand what just happened, friend?" Judah, who had once sold his brother into slavery, was now offering to become a slave himself to save his brother. The man who had shown no mercy was now begging for mercy. The man who had caused his father unspeakable pain couldn't bear to cause him more. People can change, hearts can transform, and Joseph saw it. He couldn't hold it in anymore. "Leave us," Joseph commanded his attendants. Every Egyptian in the room quickly left, and then, alone with his brothers, Joseph broke down completely. He wept so loudly that the Egyptians outside could hear him. The palace guards heard. Pharaoh's household heard about it, and through his tears, Joseph said the words that would change everything. "I am Joseph." The room went dead silent. "I am Joseph. Is my father still living?" His brothers couldn't answer. They were terrified. The man they had sold into slavery was now the second most powerful person in Egypt, and they were completely at his mercy. Joseph saw their terror. "Come closer to me," he said gently. They hesitantly stepped forward. "I am your brother Joseph," he said, tears still streaming down his face, "the one you sold into Egypt." He let that sink in. Let them feel the full weight of what they'd done. They're standing face to face with the consequence of their actions. Then he said something that must have shocked them more than the revelation itself. "But don't be distressed or angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now there has been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years there will be no plowing or reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance." Do you hear what he's saying? He's not denying what they did. He's not pretending it didn't hurt, but he's seeing it through a different lens now. "So then," Joseph continued, "it was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household and ruler of all Egypt. He forgave them completely. Not because what they did was okay, it wasn't, but because he could see how God had woven even their evil intentions into a greater plan." "Hurry back to my father," Joseph said, his voice urgent now, excited, "and tell him, this is what your son Joseph says. God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, don't delay. You'll live in the region of Goshen and be near me, you, your children and grandchildren, your flocks and herds, and all you have. I'll provide for you there, because 5 years of famine are still to come." Then he threw his arms around Benjamin and wept, and Benjamin wept with him. He kissed all his brothers and wept over them, and after that his brothers talked with him, really talked, probably for the first time in over 20 years. When Pharaoh heard that Joseph's brothers had come, he was pleased. He told Joseph, "Tell your brothers to load their animals and return to Canaan, and bring your father and your families back here. I'll give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you can enjoy the fat of the land." Joseph sent them off, loaded with gifts, carts, provisions, new clothes. To Benjamin he gave 300 shekels of silver and 5 sets of clothes. To his father he sent 10 donkeys loaded with the best things of Egypt. As they were leaving, Joseph called out to them, "Don't quarrel on the way!" Even in reconciliation, he knew them well enough to know they might start blaming each other. The brothers made their way back to Canaan, their minds reeling from everything that had happened. When they reached their father Jacob, they blurted out the news. "Joseph is still alive. In fact, he's ruler of all Egypt." Jacob's heart nearly stopped. He went numb. He didn't believe them. It was too much, too impossible. But then they told him everything Joseph had said. They showed him the carts Joseph had sent to carry him back. And the Bible says the spirit of their father Jacob revived. "I'm convinced," he said, "my son Joseph is still alive. I will go and see him before I die." So Jacob, now an old man, well over 100 years old, packed up everything and set out for Egypt with his entire family, 70 people in all. When they reached Egypt, Joseph prepared his chariot and went out to meet his father. And when he saw him, he threw his arms around him and wept for a long time. Jacob said to Joseph, "Now I'm ready to die, or since I've seen for myself that you're still alive." The boy who had been sold into slavery had saved his entire family from starvation. The one they'd tried to destroy had become their deliverer. Joseph settled his family in Goshen, the best part of Egypt, just as Pharaoh had promised. He provided for them throughout the remaining years of famine. His family thrived in Egypt, and they would grow into a great nation there. Years later, when Jacob was dying, he blessed Joseph's sons, and when Jacob died, the brothers became afraid again. What if Joseph holds a grudge against us and pays us back for all the wrongs we did to him? They worried. But they sent a message to Joseph. "Your father left these instructions before he died. Please forgive your brothers the sins and wrongs they committed in treating you so badly. Now please forgive us." When Joseph heard this, he wept. His brothers came and threw themselves down before him. "We are your slaves," they said. But Joseph said to them, "Don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. So then, don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your children." And he reassured them and spoke kindly to them. Joseph lived to be 110 years old. He saw his great-great-grandchildren, and before he died, he told his brothers something prophetic. "I'm about to die, but God will surely come to your aid and take you up out of this land to the land he promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." Even at the end, Joseph believed in God's promises. He believed in a bigger story than his own. So let me ask you, friend, what's your pit? What's your prison? What betrayal are you still carrying? What dream seems dead? Joseph's story teaches us something powerful. It's not that bad things don't happen to good people. They do. Joseph did everything right, and his life was still a series of injustices: betrayal, slavery, false accusations, prison, years of waiting. But here's what I want you to see. God wasn't absent in the pit. He wasn't absent in the prison. He was working, even when Joseph couldn't see it, preparing, positioning, weaving all the threads, even the dark ones, into something redemptive. And Joseph named his second son Ephraim. God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering, not despite his suffering, in his suffering. The pit led to Potiphar's house. Potiphar's house led to prison. Prison led to Pharaoh. Pharaoh led to power. Power led to provision. Provision led to saving his family and saving the lineage that would eventually bring forth the Messiah. None of it was wasted. Your betrayal, not wasted. Your waiting, not wasted. Your pain, not meaningless. What others meant for evil, God can use for good. Joseph could have become bitter, vengeful, hardened, but instead, he became better. He chose forgiveness over revenge. He chose to see God's hand even in the hardest chapters. And when he stood face to face with his brothers, the ones who had destroyed his life, he didn't see enemies. He saw family. In fact, he saw broken people who needed grace, just like him, just like us. The fire's dying down now, friend. But before you go, I want you to remember this. Your story isn't over. The chapter you're in right now, no matter how dark, it's not the final chapter. Keep dreaming. Keep believing. Keep doing what's right even when no one's watching. God sees, God remembers, and He's writing a story bigger than your pain. Joseph was 17 when his brothers threw him in a pit. He was 30 when he stood before Pharaoh. 13 years of suffering, 13 years of waiting. But the wait was worth it. Your wait will be worth it too. Hold on, dreamer. Hold on.